Brilliant. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jessica. I'm Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice, a think tank founded to put social justice at the heart of British politics. It's brilliant to have you all with us today to talk about something that is absolutely integral to social justice, because education is the engine of better life chances. You tell kids that they work hard, they get good exam results, and life will open up to them in new and exciting ways. But we know that too many children are not able to make the most of their education. 125,000 children are severely absent, which means they're absent more than they are present. 1.7 million children are persistently absent, which means they're missing at least 10% of their school time. The attainment gap, after a decade of progress, has started to widen again. Children's mental health has taken a nosedive, and the cost of living crisis has made what was already a difficult situation for many families near impossible. Now, the government has taken a number of very welcome steps to address these issues. Expanding the number of mental health support teams working in schools, investing up to 30 million in breakfast clubs, expanding attendance hubs. But is it doing enough, and is it doing the right things? And I think it's important to say at the outset that the responsibility for the issues that we're going to be talking about today can't all fall to teachers, who we know are already doing more than ever before. But we've got a brilliant set of panellists with us today to address these knotty issues. The Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative Party leader, former Work and Pension Secretary, and most importantly, of course, founder of the CSJ and our chairman. We've got Elijah Denning, who is a member of the Fair Education Alliance's Youth Steering Group, which is a forum that draws on young people's experiences to advocate for positive change. We've got Harriet Sargent, a journalist, author, and commentator whose back catalogue is absolutely littered with examples where she's dragged often uncomfortable social justice issues into the mainstream. And Dr. Lindsay MacDonald, who is the chief executive of Magic Breakfast, a brilliant charity that provides free breakfast to schools facing high levels of disadvantage. In terms of the structure of today's panel, all our panelists will speak for 5 minutes or so, giving us their headline thoughts on these key issues. I will then use my prerogative as chair to ask a few questions before we open up for questions and answers. But to kick things off, I will turn to Gillian, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Jess. And thank you for setting up this panel. This is by far the thing that I worry about the most, actually, as Education Secretary. Now, you might think over the last few weeks I had quite a lot of things to worry about. It's solving industrial action, exam grades, rat concrete issue in school, all of which are really vitally important. But this issue is an issue which is harder to solve in a way. It's one that we are very much focused on many things, but it's one of those things that is left. It's a unique challenge that the pandemic has left us. It's not just us, actually. When I was at the G7 with all the education ministers, they had exactly the same problem, exactly the same almost percentage, and exactly the same issue. And what's really happened is obviously we've changed the pattern of people going to school, and a lot of people have changed their behaviour as a result of that. We've then obviously had a period of time where people, obviously we worked very quickly to try and get laptops to people, to try and get learning online, etc. But we know that it wasn't a universal all across the country straight away. There were differences in terms of what schools could do. We know that some children found that extremely difficult. We know that some people actually thrived in that environment. It was not an equal picture. So we acted very quickly to get things in place. We put in OAK, we put in provision of laptops, and then as soon as we prioritised getting children back in school. But it has left some damage, it definitely has. And you see that as you see it all the time with the most disadvantaged, the most needed, the most in need, and those with special educational needs as well. So there is a huge overlap actually between all of those groups. They are the same group when you look through many different angles, actually. It's the same group, more or less, that has much more difficulty. So that's why we prioritise those groups, and evidence does show that disadvantaged pupils have fallen further behind. We were making great progress in closing the equality gap up until 2019, but they have fallen further behind, which shows that we were absolutely right to prioritise that group. We all knew, everybody knew. The latest primary level data at Key Stage 2 shows the gap remains stable, so it hasn't got worse, and we think the National Tutoring Programme has helped stabilise that. But of course, what we need to do is turn that around and start to close that gap again. It was always the number one priority of the government to close that disadvantage gap. As I say, we're making great progress, but we now need to restart that journey. The programmes that we have are designed to go beyond a multi-year period. We've got some sort of long-term things in place. But I think the most important thing, and the challenge that worries me now, is getting children back into school. Those children that have got out of the habit of going to school completely or almost completely. So we see the numbers and they're quite stark. I get attendance data actually, we get it on a daily basis. I look at it on a weekly basis. We never had that actually before the pandemic. That was something that was a byproduct, a positive byproduct of the pandemic, that we now get this daily data. So you can see wherever people are, and you can see when they're not there. There's a lot of actions and initiatives that we've put in place. So we have the Attendance Action Alliance, which I chair. It has the Children's Commissioner on. It has the chair of the GP practices in the country on. It has the chief psychiatrist on. It has mental health professionals. It has multi-academy trust heads. It has some of the unions on as well. So there's a group of us that look at what other actions we can do between all of us to try and do a number of things, but all of them aimed at trying to get those children back into school. So one of the things we've done recently is Chris Whitty has written to all of the medical professionals and said, look, when you're dealing with parents, can you encourage them to be aware that, if they have a sniffle now, it's not that they should stay at home, they actually should come to school, because behavioural habits change through COVID. We all got used to sort of keeping ourselves away, putting masks on, etc. And some of those people are unsure what the right thing is to do when you have some kind of illness. So trying to put that into perspective. We have a number of attendance hubs. Every local authority has an attendance lead now, so they look at it at a local authority level. We have a number of attendance hubs which are helping schools to just share best practice, because a number of schools, some of them have done an amazing job at getting most of their children back in. So we're trying to help them to spread that message of how you do it. Effectively, how you do it is engaging with both the children and the parents and lowering the barriers to whatever have built up. There could be barriers, real barriers, there could be barriers in their head, but whatever they are, they're barriers that need to be overcome to help people feel more comfortable about sending their child into school, or the child coming into school. The child needs to often be brought into school, so it's a combination of sometimes the child, sometimes the parents, and sometimes both. So these are the actions that we're really focused on, and we've just announced recently more attendance hubs. Obviously, we're working with Magic Breakfast as well, who are doing a fantastic job, and really what we're trying to do is remove all those barriers. If they feel like they don't have the right school place, if they don't have the right support because of their special educational needs, often a lot of children feel behind and then even more behind, and that is also a huge thing to overcome. So can we do things with helping a sort of a couple of days in, a couple of hours in, tutoring to be done in a different place. So there's a lot of action really focused on trying to work with parents and children to get them back into school. The thing we know more than anything, and we want every parent to know in the country, is the outcomes for your child will be so much better if they are in school. And these are quite vital years. All support's there to help you catch up. We've got an additional effort as well on special educational needs. We know we need to improve aspects of that. We know there's a lot of work we need to do to create more places as well for special educational needs places, and there may be some children that are waiting for those. But all of that activity coming together, the thing that I would want to say is it's the thing that most concerns me. It's the thing that is absolutely vital We know if children start their school year, they're more likely to stay in the school year. We had a huge campaign around that. Unfortunately, it was slightly overtaken by the concrete issue, but that is the main focus now. Get children into school, help them into school, help them stay in school, put the support around them. Mental health support teams in schools, we've been accelerating those to make sure that they're there as well. But we know their challenges. They're not unique to us. They are a unique challenge as a result of the unique experience we all went through in the pandemic. But we need to all work together to get everybody back in school. It's the most important thing.
Brilliant, thank you very much. If I can turn now to Elijah, please.
Yep, so hi, I'm Elijah Denning. I'm a Year 13 student currently studying A-levels, and I hope to study education at university and work in research in the future. I'm here representing the Fair Education Alliance, a coalition of 250 of the UK's leading organisations in business, the third sector and education. And I'm a member of the Youth Steering Group, a group of 26 young people aged 14 to 24. I had a standard state education. In primary school, I was on free school meals and I got pupil premium. And I was in gifted classes and I was quite a lot ahead of my peers. But I struggled quite a lot with the transition into secondary school. Even though I was academically excelling, I was socially struggling and I moved between multiple schools. And I struggled to find a school that was able to meet my needs because I have ADHD, so I needed additional assistance to be able to work the same way my peers did. When I reached year 9, I had mental health struggles after a failed managed move. So I felt that school wasn't for me. So I left school altogether, despite efforts from my parents to get me back in school because they're really big on the importance of education. So I spent a year off the books. I didn't have behavioural issues or lack academic success. I simply felt limited in school. I believe addressing the growing mental health crisis will help a lot of other young people like me not spend a year bored at home with no formal education. Even when I felt like I wanted to be pushed, it didn't feel like anybody was there to push me. Eventually, I joined a local alternative provision unit where I was taught GCSE maths and English, but I knew I needed to push myself further to be able to get to where I am now, studying A-levels, so I taught myself 6 additional GCSEs to be able to meet this level required. Despite achieving my goals, I understand that a lot of my peers couldn't do the same. A lot of my friends didn't pass GCSE maths, didn't go on to further education, employment or training. They didn't have the opportunity to re-engage with education as I did, and a pattern became obvious to me between who had the chance to go on to further education and who didn't. Those with parents who didn't go into further education and parents who didn't understand the British education system didn't seem to want to push themselves and didn't have the role models to be able to do this the way I did. Those from backgrounds of poverty that were on free school meals like me often didn't go on to college as I did. Despite my education, health and care plan, communication between services I was under was limited and intervention didn't exist until I'd reached a crisis point. I think a focus on prevention and de-escalation would have stopped me from leaving school in the first place. Through my GCSEs, I felt by myself. I had the motivation to push myself, but those around me didn't really seem to believe in me, and a lot of my friends thought what I was doing was hopeless. The independence worked well for me, but lots of my peers needed the extra assistance, and mental health had worsened through the pandemic, so I watched a lot of my friends give up, even if they had faith that they could do better like I did. I believe preventing self-exclusion is important, and that comes from fixing issues within the mental health system where a lot of young people struggle. In the Fair Education Alliance manifesto, Ask for the incoming government is better funding and join-up of services around families. I'm very optimistic that this can be achieved and that with the mental health service working together with the local authority and schools will allow young people to stop slipping through the cracks and not reach crisis point.
Thank you very much, Elijah. If I could turn to Harriet now, please.
Well, I'd first of all like to thank the CSJ for arranging this event, but most of all for their brilliant series of reports on this topic, which really alerted people to what had happened to our young people. Everyone assumed at the end of lockdown that young people would just skip back into school, in fact, lockdown was a huge, unplanned social experiment that has been a disaster for young people at every stage of their education, from toddlers through to teenagers. As I discovered when I did a series of articles on all aspects of ghost children. The young people who were, I think, hit the hardest were the disadvantaged, as we've heard, and they were most likely to suffer. Young people on free school meals are 3 times more likely to go missing. The head of a PRU that I interviewed had 14 young people he was looking after. Only 3 came back at the end of COVID. The other group of young people that nobody helped because nobody knew they needed help was what one headmaster described as under the blanket children. And these were young people that families were just about coping because they had all the structures around them. There's one young boy called Robbie who was a 13-year-old in Essex I heard about. And before lockdown, his volatile family were managing because Robbie was out of the house. Robbie was either at school or he was playing sports or he was at the youth club. But of course, pandemic hit us, those all closed down. And Robbie found himself locked up with his mother and her partner who he hated. And when schools reopened, Robbie was nowhere to be seen. He then turned up, as one of his classmates described to me, sitting on a piece of cardboard outside the local shopping centre, looking hungry and grubby. And because she said he'd always been popular, children were bringing him food, even clothing. Finally, a teacher got involved and managed to coax him back into school. But like many young kids, he found that he just found it overwhelming because he was so far behind. He grew so depressed, and he's vanished. He's now one of these ghost children. The young people I interviewed told me that they sort of more or less fell into 2 groups. They were either so depressed or anxious that they've sort of remained in their rooms after lockdown, or they were so aggressive and angry and bitter that they're out on the streets, into gangs and into crime. Schools played a major role in all of this. Young people told me that they thought that it was how their schools reacted, the routine, feedback, contact with their teacher was the key factor to their mental health and how they got through this experience. Unfortunately, it was entirely random what kind of care they got. One head I interviewed, for example, had 95 of his kids logged in every day, uploaded their work by 2:30, and then he would have that work marked and back again by 4 o'clock. Now compare that to another headmaster who admitted that there were no compulsory lessons and he had no learning online. He advised his kids to bake a cake at weekends in order to help them. And this huge variation also occurred amongst teachers. Again and again, young people complained about their teachers. One girl told me her maths teacher had been really helpful, but the rest of her teachers in the same school, she barely heard from them. They can't be asked, they're doing me no good, was how she put it. The other thing that kids really found very difficult was the sort of lack of motivation from their teachers. And one boy described to me how he deteriorated really, because he was a very driven, young Asian boy, very driven, very competitive. He would send in his work and then no one would mark it. And he had a whole term when no one gave him any feedback about his work. And he said he just deteriorated. The pandemic diminished me as a human being. He began to listen to drill music, and this again, I found a lot of boys seem to go through the same process. He was bitter and angry, and drill music reflected his frustration and rage. But unfortunately, that led to him getting involved with gangs. He said, "I'm scared, I've lost myself forever and become a different version of myself." So I have to say, I can't help but ask, when school was so vital, what was the Department of Education doing? What on earth was going on? Why weren't they ensuring that these young people were having a consistent level of care around the country? The future for them is very bleak, as I know firsthand. Because 15 years ago, I befriended 4 boys that were part of a gang in West Norwood. They dropped out of school at 14, and I've seen now, 15 years later, the effect of this loss of education and socialization, these crucial years. They have been in and out of prison ever since, at great cost to us and to themselves. And this is the tsunami of despair and failure that we've allowed to overwhelm our young people.
Thank you very much. If I can turn to Lindsay now. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive of Magic Breakfast, and Magic Breakfast is just over 20 years old. And the reason why I mention that is to highlight that child morning hunger has been an issue and a challenge for schools, for children, for decades. This is something that has been exacerbated by the cost of living crisis, worsened through the pandemic, but this is something that has existed long before this. And as the Secretary of State touched on, it's complicated and complex. But given it's the start of the morning, and we don't want to start on such a sad and down note, I think the positive to Magic Breakfast and other organizations like us, having been in existence for such a long time, is that we also know what works. We have an incredible plethora of evidence as to what we can do, what actions we can take to change the tide, to stop the tsunami, as Harriet called it, rightly so, and really make a difference to children and young people. We need to also understand that there are so many different reasons why children beyond the school gates are facing barriers to education. I was at a school in Leeds before the end of the academic year last year, sat colouring in, which is the way every day should begin, chatting with a little girl who was in year 1 and asked, "How far did you have to come to school?" Because I think it's always really interesting to understand how integrated with the local community schools are. And she said, "Oh, not very far at all. Mum and I are sleeping in the car at the moment, so it was just parked around the block." I was at another school in Hastings in second term last year, and the head teacher there was highlighting the fact that with the return to work, with more offices reopening, a lot more children and young people were being asked for or requesting, could they have a place in their Magic Breakfast free breakfast provision, because mum and dad needed to start commuting and getting back to work. An expectation was that they were in at the start of the day. And the work day and the school day do not currently complement or work alongside each other. Another school that I've been to, and the Minister mentioned the particular impact on children with special education needs, is a school in Northumbria, an absolutely incredible school. And actually the start of their school day was breakfast, because they recognize the value to life skills, to communication, to the education of children with particular learning difficulties and challenges, the opportunity for breakfast to be a place where they could learn and where they could thrive. And they had already traveled up to or over an hour to get into school. So understandably, they arrived at school too hungry to learn. So there are many different reasons why children arrive at the school gates, or maybe don't come at all, because they're hungry, because they're tired, because they don't have the fuel that they need for learning. For those children who do show up, who do make it through the school gates, they need something or someone quite often to help them transition, that soft start to the school day. And they don't necessarily meet a particular eligibility criterion, or they don't necessarily hit a particular threshold. It might be that mum is currently experiencing or undergoing cancer treatment, and twice a week they need to use the breakfast provision so that she can get to the hospital on time. So the need for breakfast provision is varied and it's changeable. We did at Magic Breakfast a significant piece of research last year called the What's for Breakfast report. It listened to the voices and the experiences of more than 9,000 pupils, parents, and caregivers. And what we learned from that, as an organization as well, was that it's not entirely because they're showing up hungry. It's not entirely because of rocketing food insecurity. More than 4 million children and young people currently, according to Food Foundation, not enough food in their homes. It can be a whole range of reasons as to why a universal school breakfast provision is desperately needed in every single school in the UK. And the benefits to that, I don't have enough time to list all of them, but you can certainly come and talk to me and my team, and we can give you more detail. But to touch on some of the points that have been raised this morning, attendance. Breakfast provision in schools was found to reduce absences, half days, by 26 half days per class of 30 in an academic year. I was reading a feedback survey that we had with schools who have just introduced Magic Breakfast in the London Borough of Camden, and the head teacher fed back, punctuality has definitely improved since starting Magic Breakfast. Parents attend and socialise. This has led to better engagement for some parents with school. And I know the CSJ published a really interesting report last year which highlighted the opportunity and the role to better engage parents to support and enable children's education and learning. Breakfast provides that opportunity. How many of us have sat round a kitchen table or a classroom table and had a bite to eat and been able to share and express what the start of our day is, how things were when we left home? Tragically, we heard about an increase in domestic violence in a lot of our schools. And again, that soft start, that opportunity to have a supportive pastoral conversation at the start of the day is crucial. We also know that education can be improved through breakfast provision. If you have an empty tummy, you might as well have empty classrooms. Children are able to flourish and thrive and not think about when is lunchtime, or worse still, when do I leave school to pick up a packet of crisps, because they're not eligible for free school meals either. There is a desperate, desperate need to make sure that our children are ready for learning, because we do provide an excellent education, both by the state and also through the support of charities and third sector organisations and the wraparound. But if they're too hungry to learn, then it really doesn't make any difference or any impact whatsoever. So I would absolutely implore the government and the Secretary of State to continue investing in breakfast, but to recognise that under your own definition, there are more than 10,000 disadvantaged schools that would benefit from National School Breakfast Programme. Currently, 2,700 are being reached. We need to invest more in school breakfasts. We need to make that investment for the future and ultimately in our children's futures in education as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And finally, turning to Sir Ian.
Thanks very much indeed. I first wanted to start by congratulating Elijah for what was a wonderfully cohesive, well-presented, and I have to tell you, unbelievably mature presentation you've just given. I wonder if we can give him another round of applause, because absolutely good. And it's a wonderful example that even the most difficult circumstances can be overcome if there is determination, and in his case, your case, Elijah, self-motivation, which is not often the case, so I congratulate for that. I think the whole issue that stands in the middle of this, and I agree pretty much with what most people have said here, is that lockdown has had just a staggeringly devastating effect on everything we do. The CSJ was set up 20 years ago, and I set it up around 5 pathways. These pathways were I would describe it as the pathways to poverty. And they were debt, addiction, family dysfunction, worklessness, and finally educational failure. So lots of families will have 1 or 2 of those. A lot of families will have all 5 of those. If you're in those 5 pathways, you are spiraling downwards. Your children will almost certainly follow you in that descent and be very difficult for them to get out of it again. This is so if we want to tackle any of this stuff, from education through to worklessness, everywhere, it comes back to the same point. These 5 pathways have to be overcome, and it's a combination of the state and parents when it comes to education that need to do this. And one of the points that needs to be understood completely is the problems that exist at home for so many of these children. Now, you were saying earlier on, Harriet, about what happened during lockdown. I had these experiences of different schools were as good or as bad as each other. So some schools were brilliant at the at-risk children. Teachers took it up like a mantle, and they kept in touch with these children throughout, and made sure, even though there were limitations in what they could learn, these are the sort of children that, who we often forgot during lockdown, that the mothers or whatever, they live in a sort of 12th floor of a tower block. They've got a couple of kids. The mother is a lone parent. She's harassed because she has to go out to work. She was the one doing the stacking and the Amazon shelves while everybody, all our wonderful middle-class characters, were sitting in their gardens having a reasonable time buying from Amazon. There were people doing this at the time who had to go about this. And the one thing I saw, there were patchy issues around this, because some teachers did not want to do this, felt that there was a threat to them if they got caught up in problems. And I know of schools that struggled to get the teachers to cooperate to be able to do this. So there was really no particular plan in place to be able to support the most at-risk children through COVID, which has made this a lot worse as a result, because they're the ones that have just fallen away from education. We have no idea. And they'll have gone into the street gang. So what we set for ourselves is a problem that we pay for many times over in crime, in abuse that follows through, and then subsequently in worklessness. Because if they have no education, the numbers of jobs they can achieve, and I was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, you could see it straight away, was so small. And the only real option for them was when they got sucked into the street gangs, which offered them a dangerous, violent life, but at the same time a sense of family peculiarly, and then as well money. And this became a hopeless situation, and it's in existence right now. Street gangs in my area are rife. We have constant stabbings and violence going on, and this is what happens. This is the consequence of that complete failure, and it starts in the family, and this is the problem here, really. I mean, for children that have dysfunctional family life, many of their parents themselves are failures of the education system. They came through without any exam results. They have drifted out of the system, left school early, often didn't come back after the age of 14. So what you're seeing is intergenerational failure in education. And those families, first of all, really don't know what to do when it comes to education. When you send homework home, they often are the ones that simply can't sit down with their kids and explain to them stuff because they don't know it themselves. And that embarrassment leads them to actually not want their children to do the homework. So these are the ones that don't do that work and don't come home. It's a real problem. Self-motivated kids will find that as a barrier. So all of this is more than just education. So I'm having the Gillians here right now, but we should have the whole cabinet sitting at this table right now, because every one of the issues that you are now facing is actually reflected in failures in every one of those areas that I've just mentioned, from addiction right the way through to worklessness, and that is a real issue. And family breakdown is a big problem in this issue. Dysfunctional family life has become a real problem for us in the UK. It's probably worse here than it is pretty much anywhere else, and we seem to not want to focus on that, and we have to focus, because that is the root problem solving issue that we can actually turn this around. So, but coming round onto this, and I have to say that the real issue here that sits here, when we get down through this, you're absolutely right about meals and breakfast and stuff like that, is to identify those families where this doesn't happen at all. I remember when I was in Easterhouse up there, I was told a very moving story about the two children that used to turn up at the Baptist Church's breakfast club in the morning, but they turned up once at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, long before it was open. They were the children of two parents who probably in their own way loved them, but they were both drug addicts. They spent all their money that was given to them on drugs. There was nothing in the fridge, there was nothing in the larder. These two kids, the eldest one was 7, the other one was 5, got themselves dressed in the morning, got themselves off to the breakfast club to get a meal before then going on to school. So the elder boy was motivated, but the tragedy of this was that their family was incapable of doing anything, because until their addictions were resolved, you couldn't get on top of the problems that existed for those kids. And that is exactly the problem that we're facing, and that COVID has exacerbated an issue that was there, made it much worse. And I leave with the thought, of all the things that happened with COVID, children were the least likely to catch COVID or suffer from it. Least likely Yet we ended up treating them as though they were senior adults with health problems, instead of understanding that actually we were going to create a bow wave of trouble by stopping them coming to school. School, for some of those children, isn't just education. It was a secure place they could go to, that where the troubles of their home life didn't visit them, and they could therefore feel wanted and helped. Shutting down that for those kids that we've just been describing was just about the worst thing that could possibly have happened. And I have to say, I hope never, ever, ever again we repeat this terrible, terrible experiment that we went through. That considered, all those other points that people have been raising, absolutely right, but we've got to turn those families around if we want to save those children at the same time.
So thank you so much to all of our panellists. Very varied and powerful reflections, I'm sure you'll agree. Just to use my prerogative as chair, I would love to kind of dig into the absence issue slightly more. It's something the CSJ has been shouting about since summer 2021. And it's fabulous that the Department for Education is piloting attendance mentors, which is what we're really calling for. There's evidence from charities that run a very similar program already that it does work. I wondered, Secretary of State, if there's anything you could share with us about early findings from the pilot evaluation and what the department's plans are to roll that pilot out more widely.
We don't have the early evaluation yet from the pilot, but I think what we know is if you engage with both the parents and the child and look to remove whatever the barriers are, the barriers could be poverty, not only hunger, but also transport costs or anything like this. There could be many barriers, uniforms, whatever. It could be confidence, it could be mental health, and they need specific support. It could be caring responsibilities sometimes as well, caring for the adult at home. And of course, many other reasons in terms of anxiety, mental health, feeling behind. I mean, Elijah's story, which was fantastic, the way he could, be so self-starting and self-determined. But I would suggest that Elijah's probably unusual in that if you're in that situation, and obviously Elijah's super bright as well. So normally you need a bit more support than that, and that's what you found with, I guess, a lot of your classmates. So identifying what it is and working to overcome it is the only way. When we used to talk about attendance, years ago before the pandemic, there was always, this would be a discussion about whether fines are appropriate and whether the fines are being done enough or not enough or too much or whatever. This is not really that conversation. It's a different conversation. So we have a number of things, and there's a lot of different work coming out of the attendance hubs as well. And some schools, by the way, have completely turned this around. Some schools have done an amazing job of getting pretty much all of the kids back in. They literally go and take the kids and bring them back in. They've literally done loads of different things with parents over the holidays as well. So there are some, and they tend to be the higher performing trusts in more difficult parts of the country as well, that have, been able to, I guess, create that relationship with parents and with children where they'll come back in. But of course, consistency, and this was mentioned, one of the first things the Department for Education did to try and get consistency, because with more than 22,000 schools, with almost virtually no notice, you're going to get, some levels of inconsistency. But that's why all vulnerable children, all children on free school meals, all children of critical workers, so the mum working in Amazon or whatever, all of those children were in school all the time. That was the reason we had those cohorts. There was that knowledge. Now, whether they all went, etc., but they obviously all were there. And then, of course, we had to put out the guidance to try and get that consistency. But what you're talking about is a whole load of people who hadn't been through experience before. I mean, some of the teachers, I remember going to schools. I wasn't in the department, I was the Apprenticeships and Skills Minister. I mean, some of the teachers didn't even know how to use the technology. They had to be taught themselves. It was kind of new to everybody. So, obviously there was lots of guidance sent out. There was lots of laptops bought. I think we did the largest order ever in the UK for a single order of laptops. Obviously, the Open Academy came out of it to try and put those bits, well, to try and have that consistency. Ofsted, obviously, we're not going in. Then Ofsted have done a review of of the learning and the experience, which we know, therefore, has said that it was inconsistent. And I think Harriet brought out some of the contrasts of some of the, like, you know, really great education. And I know, you know, a lot of my family live in Knowsley, which does have a lot of problems with its education. But in Knowsley in particular, you know, a lot of my cousins' kids are there, and so I heard all about the different variety of the, you know, they didn't mark anything. And this is actually the really important thing. First of all, you can get used to online, but knowing that somebody, it's the feedback loop. It's the same in school. It's the feedback loop that's really, really important. So I think a lot of things were done. I mean, you know, Ian says, you know, we hope we would never do a lockdown again. And I agree with that. I often get asked that question, but of course you don't know the circumstances you were in. If you were in, you know, completely different set of circumstances where it was awful for children, and of course you've got to consider teachers as well. You know, you do have to look at the circumstances, and, you know, I didn't have to make that difficult decision. It was a difficult decision. What we have to do now, as everybody does, actually pretty much most countries around the world took a similar approach, not all of them, but similar, is do everything we can now to work together. We know what we're trying to solve for, and hopefully all the attendance action, including the attendance mentors, which many schools are doing anyway. You know, they have pupil premium, they have recovery money. There's quite a lot of funding gone in that they can use to some degree as well to support their children how they need.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, rather than hog all the questions myself, I'm sure there are loads of questions in the room, so let's go straight on to Q&A. Gentleman at the front.
Good. Microphone. Good morning. Mark Laurie from Street Games. We're a sports charity that works in the most disadvantaged areas around the country. I'm really interested because a number of you have mentioned the word transition. And whilst statutory services like schools and others have got a key role to play in this, the role of the voluntary sector feels really important. We project manage the holiday activities and food programme in Birmingham and Newcastle. And when we talk to the schools this year, the difference that has made to attendance in the first week of September is absolutely huge. So I'm really interested in non-statutory organisations and how they can play a role.
Perhaps, Lindsay, you would be best placed to pick this one up.
Thank you. I think our greatest strength as voluntary organisations is our ability to innovate, you know, to try and test new things and to then share that, you know, that learning. But ultimately, we can only innovate and we can only share good practice if we're funded and if we know that that funding is in place for a long time. You know, none of these, you know, challenges or issues are going to be fixed overnight or in a single academic year. It's going to take an entire generation of children's education to address this and to genuinely tackle it. And I think that has to be, I mean, long-term decisions is the, you know, flashing sign outside this building. And I think that has to be, long-term challenges need long-term commitment and long-term funding. And there needs to be a way for all parties to recognise that and the important role that charities play in that as well.
Ian, if I can bring you in as well. I know this is an issue close to your heart.
Yeah, we wrote a very good report about sport here at the CSJ, and for far too long, and that Conservative and Labour governments in the past, thought that sport was a kind of add-on, that, you know, if you could do it, you would. We did a lot of selling of playing fields, I seem to recall, because we just, you know, state schools said they didn't think they could manage it. The problem is that sport isn't an add-on, it's absolutely critical to the whole week for those children, whether they're good at it or not. The trick is to get out and understand some things through sport, and sport teaches you massively about not succeeding. You know, because so often, you know, people can't get used to the idea they can't just win. I mean, TV's full of this, so that you've got to be a winner. The truth is, most of life is often not about winning, but coping with not sometimes doing what you want to do because something else came along. Sport is the very best teacher of how to cope with triumph and disaster and manage through it, and which they won't get anywhere else. And the other one is, I think, children that are not physically tired by the end of the school day going home are children with too much energy left for other alternative things to do. So sport is absolutely vital, and I think, Gillian, you agree with that. Getting schools back to the idea it's not an add-on, it's absolutely desperately important, and it should have the same importance as maths does in a school, because without good sport, maths is much harder to teach. If you've got over-exuberant kids running around the place with other things to do, that's really important. So, yeah, I cannot tell you how much I think sport, and CSJ thinks the same, is vital.
Next question. Lady at the front.
Thank you very much. Rachel Anderson from North East Chamber of Commerce. We've just done 2 LSIP reports, and I'm also a college governor at Middlesbrough College in the deprived North East. I think from both those experiences, the thing that shone out and came out so clearly from the research that we did was around confidence. And confidence, every single employer raised it. We're now seeing the first cohort in the college coming through that are the COVID cohorts, and the difference in levels of confidence is absolutely striking. They just don't have it. They won't look anybody in the eye. They won't, the matter. It's not universal, but mostly. So my question would be: we've got a lot in place around catch up in maths, in English, in academic studies. But actually, how do we catch people up in confidence? How do we teach confidence? How do we put that into our schools, into our colleges, which then brings people back to school? It gives them the confidence to be in there and tackle some of those mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn to the Secretary of State on this one, but first I'd really like to hear from Elijah. How important is confidence?
I think role models of success are really important. A lot of the time I was looking for what I could do to get to the place I wanted to be, but I couldn't see anybody that had done that, and I can't feel confident in myself unless I know what I'm working towards. So I think promotion of tutoring and meeting with people that come from a similar place to you can be really important. I have a mentor, and my mentor works at Cambridge studying education, and that's been really important to me, being able to see that I can do the same thing, and it's made me feel more confident in myself, that I can push myself and get to the place I want to be.
Gillian.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Elijah, but, this is always the challenge of the school system. You'll have some kids who turn up who are very confident and some who are not confident, and that's the amazing job that teachers do, one-on-one. Every single one of us in this room will remember the teacher that either sparked something in us or gave us that little step of confidence when we were not feeling that confident, or noticed we were not being included and helped us to get included. That is what teachers do absolutely brilliantly. Or there is other role models and mentors as well that play a very important part in that. So it is absolutely key. It is a vital ingredient in life. It's actually the most vital ingredient in a way, because it then enables you to have the right approach to, as Ian said, being able to overcome things, being able to deal with disappointment, being able to rebuild confidence when it's been knocked back. And I think it is the vital thing to focus on. It's all of the other activities. I mean, the Holidays and Activities Fund, I wrote to them all this year and said, make sure you look out for the kids that have not been in school. Use the Holidays and Activities Fund to draw them back in with their classmates, to give them some other aspects so that they can remove a barrier in their head, so perhaps they'll be a little bit more likely. So that was a deliberate approach. Lots of things like cadets and sports and all of those things that we support are all there to try and instill that vital confidence at a vital age. And it's a very difficult year. Those teenage years, I think, are the most difficult years for your confidence. It's when your confidence is most exposed as a way to being knocked. So, doing all of those sort of, anything to do with team things, anything to do with trips, anything to do with, that's why the pupil premium's there as well, to try and help enrich and build those experiences so that you can build your confidence. But you're right, it's the number one thing. Lots of careers now, a lot of the careers stuff, a lot of trying to get some work experience, all of those things are all aimed at creating role models, removing barriers and building children's confidence.
And sorry, just on the question of role models, I'd really like to bring Harriet in.
Well, yeah, I
thinking
think
of
it's a
your
very
personal
interesting
stories.
question, because certainly when I was befriending this gang, and also I spent a lot of time interviewing teenage boys at one point, they had dropped out of school. I mean, let's remember that 1 in 5 boys drop out of school with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. And if you're out of school at 14 and 15 and you can barely read and write, you don't have any confidence. And you might, I mean, they seemed to be very confident because they were into crime and, they were boasting about how they were doing this, that, and the other. But actually, if I took them out of their little estate, they had no confidence whatsoever. And also, they couldn't look people in the eye. I mean, that was the other thing. And unfortunately, now, at that time, when I got to know these boys, that they weren't, they're quite a lot like that. But now we have a huge, much more who are at the same level because they simply haven't done any socialization. And to actually get them to do that is going to be a massive job.
Lady in the brown jacket at the back.
Thank you very much. My name's Elizabeth Gibson. I'm from Vauxhall in central London, and I'm a school governor of a comprehensive in Westminster. My question is, in a way, turning things on the head, and that is about children eating well. And I'd be interested in what the panel think. We've heard a lot from celebrity chefs about free school meals, about breakfast clubs, and I'm not negating them. But what I think is very important is how parents can learn to cook economically and provide nourishing meals for their children and include them. What do you think should be done to encourage this? Should we get the celebrity chefs on side to provide this sort of training and teaching on television? Because many schools now cannot teach food technology because they don't have the provision within the school building to actually have kitchens to do food technology or domestic science. I'd be interested in your views. Thank you.
I think we'll start taking them in twos, actually. So we'll take one more question and then we'll get responses from the panel. Janine at the front.
Hi, I'm Janine Hyatt from the Fair Education Alliance. Oh, sorry. I'm Janine Hyatt from the Fair Education Alliance. And Elijah mentioned our manifesto where we call for better join-up of public services. And Sir Ian, you mentioned in your anecdote addiction being the problem in the case you were describing. And we know that there's so many barriers like that. How do we get all of the services that support families to be more joined up and communicate better with each other so that there's a kind of holistic view of a family? Family hubs could be one model for that, but how do we get them kind of scaled up to the point that they could serve that role, or is it integrated care boards? Would love your views on how we better achieve that join up.
Thank you. So, Ian, perhaps you could take both of those, cooking lessons and joined-up services.
Well, I can remember domestic science when I was at school. The trouble was, it was you were separated in the sexes in those days, and only girls were sent to it. But actually, the truth is that I know this is, kind of how much this all cost. But actually, a lot of the children that you're referring to in the question are children 2 or 3 generations ago would have had handed down this sort of sense about, how do you make meals, how do you shop in your budget, how do you produce good, nutritious food, would have been handed down. There's been so much breakdown in that process now over the last 30 or 40 years accelerated, that hand down doesn't happen. And what happens is that, if you see, and you go into some of the more difficult homes, those ovens are never used. Nothing is ever cooked. Too much is then bought, advertised. A lot of money is spent getting takeaways endlessly, which people got into the habit of hugely during COVID as well. A lot of which is complete rubbish and really doesn't help you at all. So learning about that helps also people with their budget. So I think it is a lesson process, but that requires obviously schools to have the right facilities to do it, and boys and girls should be part of that process without question, because the future families are going to rely on any sort of tips that they pick up. So I would be utterly in favour of that. But as I say, with one difference, both sexes end up in the kitchen, as it were, because everybody needs to. On the other issue about joined up, you're absolutely right. When I was there, with the family hubs had started. I think they are the key to this for government. What happens is you identify the problem, and then you hub up around that problem. And it works for street gangs. We recommended it for street gangs. I had my local authority work on that with street gangs, because you'll find with street gangs all of the issues I described, worklessness, failed education, family dysfunction, they're all actually there. That's why the child is in a street gang. It's because their home life and everything around it is a complete mess, and they're not capable of doing it, and they stayed away from school, and they've drifted early in, as Harriet says, without any qualifications, very early on. I mean, kids are in street gangs by the age of 11 in the UK. Their chances of surviving past 22 are very low indeed. So all of this is exactly that. So proper family hubs. The one department that was always difficult about that was the health department, who protects their data, I think, overly, because they always say in crime that, in court, that the last person allowed into the house is the health visitor. Everybody else, they know they can get out of the place from everywhere, but the one person they let in is the health visitor. The health visitors know exactly what's going on in that house. So early identification of that is massively down to the health department cooperating with the others to identify this. It would affect everything. Children being away, problems in the family over dysfunction, difficulties over drug and addiction stuff. You'd pick that all up straight away. So all I'd say is absolutely that the one department's critical to all of that feeds all the others will be the health department.
And Lindsay, on the question of food specifically, is free meals a sticking plaster when we should really be teaching parents, children how to cook?
I think, it's a very helpful sticking plaster. And I think a few thoughts. One is that school food is a huge opportunity in terms of an opportunity to provide nutrition, provide experience of new food, but also to ensure that actually the equipment to prepare meals is there. Working with schools in Westminster, actually, a lot of the schools, the challenges that their children face are that they live in temporary accommodation, and there is not suitable cooking equipment in temporary accommodation, and so they come into school and breakfast is, a really necessary meal for them. But I think opening schools up and that parental engagement, providing opportunities where where food education can take place would be brilliant. We know that having breakfast actually reduces obesity. So it's not just about the education and that learning, it's also that impact on nutrition and health more widely. And in terms of should chefs be engaged and part of this, they already are. Going back to the question about the voluntary sector, there's a brilliant charity called Chefs in Schools, which is doing just this. So again, another charity that could do with, I'm sure, some long-term and sustainable funding, but there are these innovative ways of supporting and addressing the various complex challenges, but it just needs to be seized as that opportunity and really driven forward in the long term.
Brilliant. I think we've got time probably for 2 more questions. Matthew at the back, lady in the blue shirt.
Thank you. It's been a really good panel. I'm really heartened, I must say, to hear the Secretary of State saying this is absolutely top of your priority list. It feels to me that we're going to hear a lot about kind of long-term thinking and long-term solutions at this conference. And I can't think of anything more important in the long term than the future of our children. But it seems to me that the pilot scheme, in terms of the attendance mentors, which is reaching less than 1% of absent children, 1.7 million children in this country at the moment are persistently absent. The pilot is reaching less than 1,700, really needs to be accelerated. Can't afford the long term. I've got a nephew who's just been told he has a 7-year wait to get any support for his mental health. That's not going to help him in the short term or the long term. So what can we do to accelerate the process to address this really crucial issue?
Yeah, it's a very similar point, really. This is a very resource-heavy area of work, but in the long term is going to deliver huge financial benefits for the country and all sorts of benefits. And the people who I think are a bit missing in this conversation are youth workers, because they're not school and they're not family. And I would like to know, I think it got mentioned once, and it's part of the third sector, but I'd like to know, can the youth sector get in on helping solve this problem? Because they're absolutely ideally placed to do it.
Thank you. So, Secretary of State, if you could take Matthew's question on accelerating work on attendance first.
Yeah, first of all, on long term, all of the things that this government has done since 20 11, 12, have all been long-term reforms of our education system. So we had a long-term plan from the get-go, which, you know, we'd obviously developed in opposition. And, you know, you have to do things long-term in education. The worst thing for education is stopping and starting things, you know, current fads. Everyone has a view on education, but you've got to have evidence, because there's a lot of things that seem like a really good idea that have not worked in our education system. You just need to be open about that. So we do have, obviously we've got the attendance hub, the attendance mentors, but the thing that I think the acceleration that we've chosen is on the mental health support teams in school. You know, they are trained professionals with mental health support. They can actually overcome a lot of the barriers. So the mentors, there is a pilot going on. We will look at that. But, you know, there are a lot of, you have to show that something really works. Everything sounds like it works. Everything sounds logical. You know, talking about breakfast sounds logical. But, you know, the cost of putting breakfast out across the whole country. And then you get to eating well. Eating well is a really important thing, both for adults and for children. And you talk about food tech. You know, I was one of the lucky girls that got to do food tech and had to do engineering after school every day to 5:30 because I wasn't allowed to do that. But, you know, here's the food tech that you got in our school. You went in with a pack of puff pastry, a sausage roll, sausage meat, and an egg. You know, that was it. So don't be over-romantic about, you know, the fact that you had food tech in schools, because I think I made a hot pot once in 4 years, and we ate it. It was edible. But, you know, this is, you know, there's a lot of things that sound good, but they're not really. And actually, sometimes the system is working more for the system than for the children. And what I am 100% determined to do, you know, I went to a Knowsley Comprehensive School, the white lad, working class lads that you're talking about. They're my brother, they're everybody I went to school with. They left school with no qualifications. You know, a lot of them are no longer with us because of the way life worked out. But it's really important that they're the right things. You know, if the youth workers can help. My friend was a youth worker. Some youth workers can be very effective. Some youth workers, they don't get to the people they need to get to. It's always the same challenge. And this has been something I'm very aware of growing up in Knowsley. You know, the family hubs is a brilliant idea because it brings in the services around the family up until the age of 19. The Sure Start centres were up until the age of 5, and you had to be disadvantaged to access them. They were not a universal service. So what did you find in Knowsley? Nobody went, and my friend used to run the Sure Start centre. The people who were needed that support wouldn't go because they didn't want to be stigmatised. So it's really, I think the family hubs, which are universal in services, you know, understanding that anyone can need extra support, particularly when they're embarking on family life. It's a very difficult time. You know, mental health is fragile for more than just disadvantaged people. There are other people who suffer as well during that transition. So making sure that you have the support, whether it's with addiction, whether it's with debt, whether it's with how to cook. There's lots of different support services that are put around the family hubs. So in terms of acceleration, family hubs, mental health support teams, and then we'll continue with the pilots, and then we can talk about that when we have the evidence.
And then just to pick up the specific point about youth workers and the youth sector, Harriet, perhaps you could tell us, do you think some of the young people that you've been writing about, that you've been speaking to, could they have been saved, perhaps, if there was a more active youth sector? Yes, I must
apologise, because I should have included when I said about the support system that dropped away from many of the boys, mostly the boys that I interviewed. Youth workers was one of them, so definitely anything like that, anybody like that who could get involved would be hugely helpful.
Can we get on the steering group?
Good idea.
I would love to continue this conversation, but we are at time now, I'm afraid. So please just thank all our panelists for a really brilliant conversation.